So the title of this event is Arab Transitions, but within the context of these countries, many non-Arab transitions are also taking place, and they're often moving in rather different or even incompatible directions. So I'm going to start with a brief overview of Kurdish transitions in the Arab world, namely in Syria and Iraq, and the evolving models of autonomy and decentralization that are taking place there. And I'll end with a few comments on the ongoing peace process between Turkey and the Kurdistan Workers' Party, the PKK, which is directly linked in many ways to these other two Kurdish transitions that are taking place in Arab states. So Kurdish transitions in the Arab world are taking place in the region's toughest spots. Syria and Iraq are the countries that defy transition and conflict resolution experts. They are the countries where even the most respected international research institutions' recommendations about inclusiveness and pluralism and good governance appear to be divorced from reality.
They translating.
Okay. These are not the Tunisias. These are the countries where starting conditions are as bad as they can be, and the national will for an inclusive transition is virtually non-existent. These are the contexts where monsters like the Islamic State, the Syrian regime, and other absolute rejectionists thrive, while more moderate-minded leaders with ideals of creating an inclusive national identity cannot, by the rules of the game, succeed. And most significantly for the Kurds, these are also countries where the central state has lost control over much of the country, and new forms of autonomy are taking shape in ad hoc ways. So after the fall of Saddam Hussein, a federal Iraq was constitutionally inscribed, allowing for the emergence of an empowered Kurdistan regional government, the KRG, in the north. And today, the limits of the asymmetric federalism that has emerged in Iraq that has mostly favored Iraqi Kurdistan are still being debated, especially with respect to the highly controversial matter of oil revenue sharing. In Syria, Kurds are operating in the context of a partial transition in Kurdish majority areas, where the regime has largely lost control in those areas, with the notable exception of Qamishli, and one group, in this case the PYD and the YPG, has consolidated a degree of independent governance and security control. So I'll start with Iraq. Since all the panels have touched so heavily on inclusiveness and plurality, I think it is relevant to raise that the ongoing tension over Iraqi Kurdistan's exercises of autonomy is at least partly a function of the exceptionally exclusionary constitutional drafting process that the US-led Coalition Provisional Authority, the CPA, had overseen after 2003. As one scholar put it, the constitution was basically negotiated by Shia Islamists and Kurdish ethno-nationalists with nominal Sunni participation. The CPA negotiated the issue of federalism directly with Kurdish parties in secret, and in 2005 a constitutional committee was appointed and was given 3 months to draft the permanent constitution. So for the sake of comparison, in South Africa it took 7 years to draft the 1997 constitution. The Kurds in Iraq have their own autonomous parliament, military, social system, and as of recently, their own pipeline that transports oil to Turkey from fields that are managed by companies that sign contracts unilaterally with the KRG. And these are contracts that Baghdad considers to be illegal. Another constitutional sticking point has long been Article 140 of the Constitution, which stipulated that a referendum should take place in the ethnically mixed and oil-rich province of Kirkuk to determine its governance status. The KRG has long bemoaned the fact that Article 140 was never implemented, and Kirkuk remained under the central government's authority. This was true until this past summer, when the Islamic State's takeover of Mosul prompted the Iraqi army to withdraw from many of its positions north of Baghdad. Upon the army's withdrawal, Kurdish Peshmerga forces swiftly seized Kirkuk and now de facto control much of the hotly contested province. The Kurds' takeover of Kirkuk and push for greater autonomy are part of a classic and time-tested strategy of simply creating facts on the ground and letting everyone else deal with it. The Syrian Kurdish experiment with autonomy is being conducted under the model of Kurdish nationalism that was pioneered by PKK leader Abdullah Öcalan, who is also KRG leader Barzani's arch-rival. So Barzani and Öcalan espouse competing models of Kurdish nationalism, whereas Barzani's model is more capitalist-minded, built around economic integration with powerful neighbors such as Turkey. Öcalan's is rooted in a leftist political ideology and maintains a focus on the struggle for Kurdish civil rights. Öcalan's model has quite clearly won out over Barzani's in Syria, and the PYD there has pioneered local autonomous governing cantons with substantial local support, and the YPG, which is the armed branch operating there, has been exceptionally successful at fighting IS and preventing its expansion in Kurdish regions. These two Kurdish transitional experiments with autonomy also raise the question of identity and how identity changes in reaction to power balances and where it ends and where it starts. The rise of a common enemy, and IS in particular, has been transformative for the Kurds. Kobane, the Syrian Kurdish border town where Kurdish fighters and IS have been battling for months, looks at face value like a Syria story. But Kobani has emerged as a symbol of Kurdish resistance and has, as a result, had a dramatic effect beyond Syria's borders of fostering nationalist unity at the street level among Kurds in Iraq, Syria, Turkey, and even Iran. While political schisms remain intact, at the street level, we are seeing Kurds everywhere rallying for the same cause of Kobani. And the public pressure to put on a united Kurdish front has been so immense that it's actually starting to play into the politics. And in an unprecedented move, Barzani sent Iraqi Kurdish fighters to help the YPG in Syria. And this is the first time that you have Öcalan and Barzani-backed fighters fighting alongside each other in Syria. So I want to move on a bit to touch on the Turkish Kurds, since this topic relates more directly to the title of this panel. In Turkey, the PKK peace process has been widely hailed as the best opportunity to reach a compromise agreement between the two sides. And if it fails, a restart of hostilities could trigger a much more violent phase in the conflict. Until recently, the ceasefire and peace process appeared to be somewhat firmly in place. Despite slow movement on the Turkish side regarding political and civil rights reforms, and on the PKK side regarding the withdrawal of combatants. But the rise of IS, and in particular events in Kobani over the past few months, have thrown the peace process into flux. PKK-linked fighters, including the YPG in Syria, PJAK in Iran, and the HPG Turkish Kurd fighters based in the Kandil Mountains of Iraqi Kurdistan, have all proven to be exceptionally successful at fighting IS, and have in this regard outperformed the Iraqi Kurdish Peshmerga, the Iraqi army, and the Free Syrian Army. Indeed, the PKK-linked fighters are the US's most reliable local fighting partner on the ground in both Iraq and Syria in the fight against IS. After long being hesitant to develop a strong relationship with these forces due to their links with the PKK, which the US designates as a terrorist group, the Pentagon has said that there is a secret new system in which Syrian Kurdish fighters feed target information to Allied war planners. So partly because of the new global panic about IS, nobody really wants the PKK to disarm outside of Turkey. And the group is currently in a position of strength, with unprecedented international support for its linked armed groups. The only realistic prospect for disarmament of the PKK, then, is within Turkey. The PKK's operational bases in Iraq and its sister armed parties in Syria and Iran will have to be maintained. So one would think that Turkey would be feeling the heat to come up with a conditional amnesty that allows for successful demobilization and other ways to meet the PKK's more reasonable demands, which include decentralization, full mother language education, lowering the election threshold, and better prison terms for Öcalan, to ensure that the peace process is preserved despite these new challenges. Instead, President Erdogan has inflamed the situation more by making statements that liken the PKK to IS, and the Turkish military has made efforts to block Kurdish fighters and supplies from crossing the border into Kobani to support the YPG, which is, again, the Syrian Kurdish force that's fighting in Syria. Many complain that Turkey for years allowed a jihadi highway to develop on its border, but now hypocritically blocks Kurdish fighters from going in to fight those jihadis. This has given rise to a widespread impression that Turkey wants to see Kobane fall if that would bring the YPG to its knees. And the more conspiratorial version of this, which is increasingly espoused by Kurds across the region, is that Turkey is actively backing IS against the Kurds. So as a result of these frustrations, PKK leaders have threatened to end the PKK-Turkey peace process if Kobane falls. And now Turkey faces the rather daunting task of coming up with a transitional justice program that would encourage the PKK to disarm within Turkey at its moment of strength. And Öcalan is still giving the right signals, so with a conditional amnesty and perhaps it's been suggested the creation of a truth commission, which is something that Öcalan has called for, there may be hope yet for the peace process.